Autumn in the year 167 BC, when the leaves of Judea's olive groves turned brittle under a relentless sun, and the air hung heavy with the scent of dust and distant smoke from sacrificial fires not of the Lord's making. You are Miriam, 19 summers old, your hands still trembling from the henna stains of preparation, the silk of your veil catching the last light of the day as it filters through the lattice of your family's courtyard in Modiin. The sounds come first, the low murmur of guests reciting psalms, the clink of clay cups filled with sweet wine, the laughter of ants trying to mask their unease. Then, the smell olive oil lamps flickering mixed with the sharper tang of unwashed leather from the soldiers' boots outside the gate. Your groom Ezra stands beside you, his fingers brushing yours in a promise, sealed before the elders, his eyes dark with the weight of what the scrolls whisper, but no one dares speak. The gate creaks open and the air shifts thickens with the metallic bite of bronze armor and sweat-soaked wool. Footsteps heavy and deliberate echo on the stone path, each one a drumbeat against your ribs. You see them now. Seleucid officers, their faces shadowed under plumed helmets, eyes gleaming like the points of spears. The lead one, a captain named Lysimachus, steps forward, his hand extended not in greeting but in claim. The room falls silent, the psalms dying on lips, the wine turning bitter on tongues. Ezra's grip tightens, but he does not move. No one moves. The captain's gaze lands on you, appraising, possessive, as if you are a field to be harvested or a ram for the altar. He takes one look at your veil, at the joy frozen on your face, and smiles a thin, cruel line that promises the night will not end with blessings, but with brokenness. What kind of empire engineers such a violation, turning sacred unions into instruments of terror? Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to read involves sexual violence on a systematic scale, a decree designed to shatter the intimate core of a people's identity. These details draw from ancient Midrashic traditions elaborated in texts like the Hybrid Scholion on Megillat Taanit and Midrash Chanukah, as well as the broader historical persecutions documented in the Maccabees and Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews. They are deeply disturbing, rooted in the real horrors of Antiochus IV Epiphanes' reign, though the specific scale, thousands of brides affected, emerges from rabbinic storytelling to amplify the collective trauma. If this content is too heavy, if it stirs memories or fears, you'd rather not confront, step away now. There's no shame in that. Self-care is its own act of resistance. For those continuing, know that we'll approach this with restraint, focusing not on exploitation, but on the machinery of power that allowed it, the resilience that defied it, and the warnings it holds for us today. These aren't tales to titillate, they're calls to remember why systems of control must always be questioned. This wasn't mere conquest, the clash of empires where victors imposed their will and the defeated lick wounds in silence. This was erasure, a deliberate unmaking of a people from the inside out, thread by thread, vow by vow. In the shadow of the Seleucid throne, under the mad gaze of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who styled himself God Manifest, as if divinity could cloak his depravities, a decree went forth in 167 BC that struck at the heart of Jewish life, the wedding night, that most private sanctum of hope and covenant became a public altar of humiliation. Soldiers, not lovers, would claim the first embrace, purity defiled not by chance, but by policy. Thousands Midrashim speak of 7,000 brides over 3 years and 8 months, waited in terror. Their joy poisoned by the Hagmon's shadow, the governor's rite of first night known in whispers as ius primae noctis, though no Roman law birthed it here. It was Seleucid innovation, a psychological siege wrapped in legal parchment. The question isn't whether you can stomach the details. History spares no one its truths. It's whether you're willing to carry the memory forward, to see in these ancient brides the faces of every woman whose body has been weaponized by the state, from the comfort women of imperial Japan to the Yazidi survivors under ISIS. This narrative reframes the Maccabean revolt not as a tidy holiday origin story of oil and miracles, but as a ragged cry against gendered terror, a rebellion sparked in the bridal chamber. Scholar Tessa Rajak, in her analysis of Hellenistic persecutions, notes how such acts weren't random sadism, but cultural genocide, targeting reproduction and ritual to break the chain of transmission. And Daniel R. Schwartz, in his commentary on Maccabees, underscores the Midrashic layer. These stories, though, embellished echo the verifiable edicts, banning circumcision and Sabbath-forcing swine sacrifices, each a cut at identity's root. If you believe these silenced voices deserve amplification, consider sharing this account. Every echo unearths another fragment from the archives, ensuring the past doesn't stay buried. To understand what happened to those brides, Miriam, Chanukah, and the countless others whose names dissolved into collective lament, you must first grasp the machine that forged their tormentor. The Seleucid Empire, born from the corpse of Alexander the Great's conquests in 323 BC, sprawled like a colossus across the Near East, from the Aegean shores to the Indus fringes, a Hellenistic behemoth sustained by tribute trade routes and the unyielding boot of phalanx legions. By the mid-2nd century BC, it was fraying at the edges. Ptolemaic Egypt nibbled from the South. Parthian horsemen harried the east, and Rome loomed like a gathering storm after crushing Antiochus III at Magnesia in 190 BC. Judea, that narrow strip of rocky hills and sacred springs, was a mere satrapy, a buffer asset valued for its position on the coastal highway and its fertile Jordan Valley, but distrusted for its monotheistic stubbornness amid the pantheon of Zeus and Apollo. The political climate was a powder keg of resentment. Hellenized Jews in Jerusalem's gymnasia aped Greek ways, nude athletics philosophical symposia, while rural pietists clung to Torah and temple, viewing the newcomers as defilers. Economically, the empire squeezed taxes tripled under Antiochus III's treaty with Rome, funneled to war indemnities, leaving Judean farmers indentured to absentee landlords. Militarily, garrisons dotted the landscape. Acrobatany fortress overlooking Samaria, the Acra citadel, squatting like a tumor on Jerusalem's heights, housing phalangites whose loyalty was bought with wine and whores, their disdain for barbarian customs a license for excess. Social hierarchies hardened. High priests like Jason bought office with bribes, installing epheb schools where boys oiled their bodies and girls learned the lyre, widening the chasm between urban cosmopolites and village faithful. According to 1 Maccabees 1:10-15, this was no organic fusion, but forced assimilation envoys dispatched to pollute the land and people, turning sacred spaces into theaters of the profane. Into this cauldron stepped Antiochus IV Epiphanes, not born a monster, but manufactured by the grindstone of dynastic ambition and Roman captivity. Born around 215 BC as Mithradates in Antioch, the gleaming capital where Seleucus IV had founded a metropolis of marble colonnades and roaring aqueducts, he was the younger son of Antiochus III the Great, the Conqueror, who had humbled Egypt only to kneel before Scipio Africanus. The family was a nest of vipers, his father a towering figure with a beard like rippling bronze waves, and eyes that burned with the fire of Arsacid pretensions, ruled with a charisma laced with paranoia, executing siblings on whispers of treason. His mother, Laodice III, was a sister wife of Ptolemaic blood, her beauty, legendary porcelain skin, raven hair coiled in golden nets, yet her personality sharp as a stiletto, whispering alliances in shadowed bedchambers. She bore 5 children, but survival was a lottery. The eldest brother, Antiochus, predeceased their father in a hunting accident at age 20, gored by a boar in the Taurus Mountains, his blood staining the snow as courtiers feigned grief while plotting ascendance. By age 10, young Mithradates, or Demetrius, as he was renamed in flattery to the Ptolemies, watched his world contract. In 189 BC, after Magnesia, the Treaty of Apamea demanded hostages. The king's son and 100 nobles dispatched to Rome like chained lions. The journey was a descent across the Hellespont, in leaky tree rims up the Adriatic, in winter gales that snapped masts like kindling. The boy huddled in the hold, the salt spray mingling with his vomit, the cries of seasick guards, a lullaby of humiliation. Rome greeted him not with togas and triumphs, but with the chill of the Capitoline where he was housed in the temple of Tarpeian Jupiter, a gilded cage amid senators who viewed him as a curiosity, a barbarian princeling to be paraded at banquets. There, at 12, he learned the Republic's underbelly slaves, flogged in the Forum gladiators' carving entrails in the sand, the patricians' casual cruelties masked by oratory. A tutor, the Stoic philosopher Athenion, drilled him in Greek rhetoric and Roman realpolitik. But the boy's nights were haunted by dreams of Antioch's bazaars, the call of muezzins to prayer twisted into Latin hymns. Tragedy compounded. News arrived in 187 BC that his father had perished in Tabai, poisoned by a disgruntled satrap, or, as Polybius whispers, by his own hand in despair, struck down. At 52, his body shipped home in honey barrels to thwart decay, a royal indignity that festered in the son's heart. Laodice followed soon after her death in Rome, rumored as suicide, overwhelmed by exile. She, who had orchestrated coups, ended her days in a foreign bed, her final words lost to history, perhaps a curse on the eagles that caged her. The siblings scattered. An older sister married off to a Persian noble, vanished into harems, another brother seized by illness en route home. By 15, Demetrius was alone, the last sign in his correspondence with Seleucus IV, now king, intercepted by watchful questors, fueling paranoia that his uncle plotted his erasure. Freed at 21 upon Seleucus's accession, he returned to Antioch a ghost of himself, the boyish face, hardened eyes darting like a cornered fox. Josephus in Antiquities 12:5-1 describes him as eager for glory but unstable, a man who aped Roman discipline in parades but dissolved into bacchanals, elephants trumpeting as he danced in ivy crowns. Psychological stages unfolded: first overcompensation, commissioning statues of himself as Zeus minting coins with his profile divine, then projection unleashing on subjects the humiliations he'd endured, tax farmers scourged, envoys humiliated. A letter discovered in 1958 among the Zenon papyri from Philadelphia hints at early cruelty, a village headman flayed, for short tribute his skin stretched as a tent. By 175 BC, when Seleucus fell to Heliodorus's dagger, poisoned in the temple precincts, his son Demetrius, a child hostage. Once more, Antiochus seized the diadem, proclaiming Epiphanes, the shining one. Suetonius's echo in later Roman texts rings chilling. There never was a better servant nor a worse master, a maxim that fit the man who bowed to Rome while breaking his people. And then everything changed. In 169 BC, fresh from plundering the Jerusalem temple. Maccabees, rated for 2024, recounts how he melted down golden vessels, 17 talents hauled away in carts, the high priest's coffers emptied to fund Egyptian campaigns. The king returned, not sated, but enraged. Rumors swirled Jason the Hellenizer he'd installed, plotted with Ptolemy VI. The Jews, those intractable monotheists, had mocked his retreat from Egypt after Philometor's elephants scattered his phalanx at Pelusium. In council, amid the mosaics of Daphne's palaces, where fountains played and concubines lounged on silk divans, advisors urged conciliation. But Antiochus, wine-flushed face contorted in the lamplight, slammed his fist on the porphyry table. "They call me Epiphanes. Let them see the epi-madness." Decrees flew like arrows, circumcision outlawed Sabbaths, profane Torah scrolls burned, and the crown of horrors, the bridal tax ius primae noctis, enforced by garrisons in every district, a violation not of body alone, but of lineage, ensuring no pure seed flowered under Jewish vows. It was no whim, it was warfare, psychological and generational, designed to breed out resistance. As the ink dried on the edict, riders spurred south papyrus rolls, unrolling in village squares, the words tasting like ash. By grace of the divine king, the first fruits of the bedchamber belong to the crown. What I'm about to unfold isn't random savagery, the fevered lashing of a deranged ruler. It's a system, 5 interlocking decrees, layered over months, each calibrated to corrode a facet of the spirit, faith, family, future, fidelity, and finally fury. The first targeted belief, the second blood, The third bonds, the fourth bodies, the fifth, the breaking point where victims became victors. Documented in 2 Maccabees 6:1-11 and corroborated by Josephus. These weren't edicts born in vacuum, but evolved from earlier fiscal grabs, the salt tax of 178 BC, the brothel levy now weaponized against the superstitious cult of Yahweh. They fit a pattern. Hellenistic kings from Ptolemy the Fern to the Attalids used similar tools, but Antiochus refined them into a machine of erasure, his court scribes logging compliance like accountants tallying olive yields. Modern parallels abound from the Ottoman devshirme, snatching Christian boys to the Rwandan Hutu radio calls for Tutsi cockroaches, reminders that bureaucracy is cruelty's best disguise. First came the pollution of the sanctuary, the opening salvo that set the stage for all that followed, transforming the temple not into a brothel, but something worse, a forge where sacred met profane in deliberate desecration. It was the spring of 167 BC when almond blossoms dusted the Kidron Valley like fallen stars, and the air in Jerusalem carried the sharp bite of myrtle from Sukkot preparations long past. The city sprawled under a sky bruised purple by dusk, its walls patched from Persian sieges, the Herodian expansions yet a dream. Inside the Acra, that squat fortress of hewn stone and iron gates perched on the Ophel hill, Seleucid officers lounged in tunics dyed Tyrian purple, their beards oiled chalices brimming with Chian wine imported from Lesbos. Lysimachus, brother to the high priest Menelaus, himself a turncoat who bought office for 300 talents, paced the ramparts, his sandals scuffing against the tiles inlaid with Dionysian vines. Political winds whipped fierce Antiochus, stung by Roman envoys, demanding tribute arrears needed a spectacle to rally the garrison, 4,000 phalangites idle since the Egyptian fiasco, their sarissas rusting from disuse. Elsewhere, Jason's partisans rioted in the theater district, flinging stones at ephebs in the gymnasium, cries of one god clashing with chants to Hermes. The weather turned sultry, a sirocco from the desert coating throats with grit, making every breath a reminder of thirst unquenched. The incident unfolded at dawn as priests in linen ephods approached the altar, their censers swinging arcs of frankincense that curled like prayers toward heaven. Among them was Eleazar, 60 years old, a scribe whose fingers were ink-stained from copying Deuteronomy under lamplight, his family a line of Levites tracing to Ezra's return. He had risen before first light, kissing his wife's forehead, Rachel, 45, her hair silvered like temple menorahs, whispering blessings over their 3 sons, the youngest apprenticed in the scriptorium, dreaming of bar mitzvah recitals. Eleazar's thoughts that morning wandered to the coming Passover, the lamb's blood, on lintels a shield against plagues past and present. The air hummed with the low chant of the Shema voices, blending in harmony honed over generations, the stone warm underfoot from yesterday's sun. Then the horns blared, Seleucid salpinks brazen and discordant, shattering the rhythm. Lysimachus strode in, flanked by 10 guards in scale mail, their pikes glinting like accusatory fingers. He bore not a warrant, but a suckling pig, its squeals piercing the sanctity hooves, kicking futilely against the harness. By order of the divine Epiphanes, he proclaimed, voice echoing off the veil, the abominable superstition ends, sacrifice to Zeus Olympios, protector of kings. Eleazar paused, censor, still his heart a drum in his chest. The priests murmured, robes rustling like dry leaves, stomachs hollow from the pre-dawn fast tongues parched against the roof of mouths. Tension coiled, a guard prodded a young acolyte 19, and trembling his name, Shimon, son of a fisherman from Galilee who had journeyed to serve after his betrothal, whispering to his bride-to-be of return by Shavuot. Eleazar stepped forward, eyes meeting Lysimachus's cold blue against deep brown, and refused. We serve the Eternal One, not your Olympians. The act was swift, implied in the hush that followed. They led Eleazar away to the court of the Gentiles, the crowd parting like Red Sea waves frozen mid-miracle. Skipped in the telling as 2 Maccabees 6:18-31 implies, rather than details the instruments brought forward, the crowd forced to witness not the flesh but the fracture. When they returned him, his steps faltered, breath ragged, but his gaze held defiant, adrift in pain, yet anchored. He collapsed at the altar's base, whispering Torah verses unbroken. Shimon, the young one, averted his eyes, fists clenched, vowing silent oaths. This wasn't about one man's flesh. It was about the system, a blueprint for control, etched in blood and edict. The desecration revealed power's architecture, religious coercion as economic lever. The temple's treasures, half shekels from diaspora Jews, redirected to Seleucid coffers funding the very troops who enforced it. It fit broader patterns, as scholar John Collins notes, in Between Athens and Jerusalem, where Hellenistic rulers like Ptolemy IV used similar syncretism to tax descent, blending gods to blur lines. Debates rage. Was it retaliation for Jewish aid to Ptolemy or internal Hellenizer plots? Either way, long-term scars ran deep. Maccabees 6:12-16 describes priests slitting throats in secret, but the chill settled worship underground community, fracturing into Hasidim holdouts and apostate collaborators. They didn't seek confessions, they sought spectacle martyrs, too inspiring for resistance, ghosts, too silent for memory. Antiochus wasn't destroying bodies, he was dissolving the covenantal fabric where faith was the warp and law the weft. In modern terms, it's the Taliban's mosque bombings, or Soviet atheism's museums of anti-religion power, not content with obedience demanding apostasy. The analysis lingers because the lesson does. When the sacred is profaned, it's not the altar that bleeds, it's the people who pray before it, their spirits starved, their futures unwritten. But the machine ground on, undeterred by one old man's stand, its next gear meshing with the precision of a water clock in Alexandria's library. The second act turned to bloodlines, the edict against circumcision that autumn, when pomegranates split open in Judean orchards, their seeds a ruby promise of abundance, mocked by the king's barren decrees. It was October 18 BC, the air crisp with the first rains pattering on thatched roofs in Bethlehem's hills, where shepherds huddled around fires that spat sparks into the night. The location was Hebron, ancient city of patriarchs. Its Machpelah cave, a vault of bones under limestone domes, the air inside cool and musty, laced with the earthiness of myrtle wreaths laid at Abraham's tomb. Seleucid patrols 20 strong under a centurion named Apelles. A Syrian recruit with a scar twisting his lip into a perpetual sneer rode in at midday, their horses' hooves churning mud into slurry cloaks sodden from the downpour. Political currents surged. Reports from Jerusalem of Eleazar's martyrdom had trickled south, fueling whispers in synagogues, while Antiochus, wintering in Antioch, dispatched couched missives demanding Hellenic uniformity to counter Parthian threats. The weather mirrored the mood-gray skies, pressing low winds keening through acacia groves like lamentations. The taste of rain on lips mingled with the salt of fear. Among the gathered was Joshua ben Levi, 32, a mason whose hands bore the calluses of quarrying stone for the Second Temple's outer courts, his back bent from hauling cedars from Lebanon. He had 5 children, the eldest son Caleb, 8 days old, swaddled in linen dyed with madder root, his tiny cries a melody of new life amid the patriarch's silence. Joshua's wife, Deborah, 28, stood beside the cradle in the cave's antechamber, her shawl-drawn tight eyes the color of Jordan silt, reflecting the resolve forged in her father's tales of Babylonian exile. They had journeyed from their farmstead near Tekoa, where olive presses groaned under harvest, to fulfill the covenant, the knife ready, the mohel chanting Genesis 17 under his breath. Joshua's thoughts drifted to his own Brit Milah, the feast of figs and wine, the elders' blessings sealing generations. The family had sacrificed a lamb at dawn, its blood daubed on the threshold, a hedge against the rumors of edicts from the north. The patrol burst in armor, clanking like chains, the scent of wet horse and oiled leather overwhelming the incense. Apelles, dismounted parchment unrolling with a snap, his voice booming off the walls. By royal command, the barbaric mutilation ends. The 8th day brings no knife, only the seal of Zeus. Joshua froze the blade halfway drawn, his pulse a thunder in his ears. Deborah clutched the babe closer, her breath shallow, the child's warmth against her chest a fragile shield. Tension mounted. A guard seized an elder 65 and frail named Reuben, who had come for his grandson's right, his robes whispering as he was shoved to the wall. Joshua stepped forward, voice steady despite the dryness in his throat. "This is our covenant flesh of our flesh, command of the Almighty." Apelles laughed a bark that echoed unnaturally and signaled. They led Joshua and Reuben away to the cave's outer yard, the rain now a torrent, pooling in footprints soaking tunics to the skin. The act implied in the storm's roar and the men's absence. Maccabees 6:10 alludes to such enforcements without linger on the lash or spear. When they returned, Reuben he staggered supported by kin, his whispers of Shema, unbroken eyes distant, but spirit intact. Joshua followed bloodied but unbowed the child, safe in Deborah's arms, the rite postponed, but the vow etched deeper. This decree wasn't personal vendetta. It was systemic surgery, excising the mark of chosenness to homogenize the empire's assets. It exposed the hierarchies high priests like Menelaus profited from the band-selling circumcision tools as scrap, while rural families like Joshua's bore the brunt their lineages threatened. Scholar Martin Hengel in Judaism and Hellenism debates the intent was it cultural leveling or anti-Jewish pogrom, but evidence from Babylonian chronicles corroborates similar bans under earlier kings' patterns of control through bodily autonomy's denial. The impacts rippled birth rates dipped, as Josephus notes, in Against Apian, 2.202 families hiding newborns in caves, the social fabric fraying as grandfathers passed no Brit to grandsons. They wanted no heirs to the promise, no circumcision to mock their God's wholeness. It's erasure by omission, like the Nazis' sterilization laws, or China's one-child echoes power dictating not just who lives, but how life is marked. Antiochus destroyed not individuals, but the invisible threads of eternity, leaving ghosts without genealogies. The machine oiled by compliance, and fear clicked to its third phase, targeting the bonds of family in the winter of 167 BC, when frost rhymed the Jordan's banks, and the Wadi winds carried the howl of jackals through Bethlehem's empty streets. On the third day of deepening decrees, as snow dusted the Golan heights, and the air in Jerusalem bit with the chill of unshared hearths, the edict against Sabbaths descended, turning rest into rebellion's seed. It was December 167 BC, the shortest days cloaking the city in twilight. By noon, lamps guttering early in narrow alleys where merchants bartered for charcoal to ward off the cold. The locale was the broad plaza before the temple, now ringed by Seleucid barricades of stacked shields and tripods for Zeus altars, the ground slick with half-melted slush, the smell of wet wool and charred cedar from hasty pyres. Officers under Nicanor, a Thracian brute with arms like knotted vines and a laugh like grinding millstones, drilled their men in the shadow of the Antonia Tower, their breaths clouding the air boots, thudding in cadence against flagstones. The political backdrop seethed. Couriers from Antioch brought word of Antiochus's Egyptian truce with Rome, freeing troops for internal policing, while Jewish Hasidim smuggled scrolls in saddlebags, their networks buzzing like beehives disturbed. The weather pressed heavy fog rolling from the valley, tasting of iron on tongues, textures of damp cloaks chafing skin raw. At the center was Hannah 24, a weaver whose fingers danced over looms in her Bethzer home, crafting linens embroidered with pomegranates for the priestly garments, her laughter alight in the gloom for her 5 siblings. She was the eldest daughter of a scribe, her mother gone to fever 5 years prior, leaving her to tend the hearth in the hopes of her betrothed, a shepherd named Joel, whose flock grazed the Judean wilds. Hannah's mornings began with the grind of grain, her thoughts on the coming betrothal feast, the exchange of rings under canopy, the vows that bound stronger than Seleucid chains. The family had gathered, that Sabbath Eve candles kindled in defiance, the blessings recited in hushed tones, the taste of challah warm and yeasty against the fast's end. The patrol swept in at dusk, torches flaring orange against the gloom, the crackle of flames mingling with the sizzle of frying latkes abandoned on hearths. Nicanor, face ruddy from mulled wine, unrolled the scroll. No idling on the 7th day, labor or perish as Zeus demands. Hannah's father rose, voice quavering, but firm, his beard white as the snow outside. The plaza filled 200 souls, from merchants in fringed shawls to beggars in rags, their stomachs rumbling, skin prickling in the damp. Tension built a guard, prodded Joel 26 and broad-shouldered, who shielded Hannah, his hand on her arm, a anchor in the press. She met Nicanor's gaze, her heart hammering, the fog beating on her lashes. They dragged the resistors, Hannah's father among them, to the edge of the plaza, the crowd's murmurs swelling to cries, the cold seeping into bones. The act elided in the texts, Josephus in Antiquities 12 and 5.4, noting only many put to death for Sabbath observance, the implication in the screams swallowed by wind. When they brought back her father, he leaned on Joel, breath labored, but murmured, "Remember the day, keep it holy," his eyes clear, spirit unquenched. Hannah knelt, tears freezing on cheeks, vowing in silence to weave no more for a world that profaned rest. This wasn't caprice. It was the system assaulting time itself, the Sabbath as Jewish rhythm disrupted, to impose Hellenistic ceaselessness. It laid bare the structure's garrisons as timekeepers, informants, rewarded with grain quotas, fitting the pattern of Roman Sabbath bans under Hadrian, later echoed. Eric Gruen, in Heritage and Hellenism, argues it was less theological than practical. Jews resting meant lost productivity, but the debate underscores the edict's genius: break the week, break the week. Society splintered, underground minyans in catacombs, the elderly dying from exposure in hidden hills. They sought not workers, but worshippers, remade ghosts without pause, their calendars erased. Like factory whistles in industrial dawns or digital surveillance of prayer apps today, its power colonizing the soul's quiet, leaving humanity adrift in endless toil. While the Sabbaths bled into secret vigils, the machine advanced to its fourth act, the one that twisted fidelity into fear, the ban on Torah study that winter's end, when the first crocuses pierced the thawing earth in the Sharon plain. What happened next reveals the decree's cruelest turn, the bridal claim that shattered homes in the spring thaw of 167 BC, when wildflowers carpeted the hills around Emmaus, and the air hummed with bees drunk on nectar, a mockery of the sweetness stolen from new unions. It was April, the month of Nisan, when Passover lambs should have bleated in anticipation, but instead the valleys echoed with muffled sobs from hidden chambers. The setting was a cluster of villages, near Lydda mud-brick homes with flat roofs, where families once danced at weddings, now patrolled by Seleucid castra encampments of felt tents and picket lines, the ground churned to mire by chariot wheels, the odor of cook fires heavy with mutton fat and unwashed men. The officers, led by a Mysian captain named Gorgias, lean as a whip with eyes like chipped obsidian and a habit of toying with a gutting knife, enforced the edict from horseback, their cloaks embroidered with the anchor and eagle of Seleucid might. Politically, the empire teetered. Antiochus marched east against the Parthians, leaving deputies to pacify Judea, while Jewish couriers dodged patrols carrying papyri of resistance plans. The weather softened sun-warming stones to a deceptive comfort, the touch of breeze on skin a reminder of freedoms lost, tastes of bitter herbs from clandestine seders lingering on tongues. The victims were sisters in suffering, but focus here on Rivka, 22, a potter's daughter, whose hands shaped amphorae in her father's kiln, her fingers scarred from clay and fire, her betrothal to a carpenter named Amos, sealed with a ring of hammered bronze. Rivka was known for her songs, melodies from the Song of Songs sung at wellsides, her family a tapestry of aunts and cousins who had fled Babylonian fires generations past. She dreamed of the chuppah, the 7 blessings over wine, the night where fidelity bloomed in whispers and touch. Amos 25. Broad from swinging adzes had built their bridal bed with acacia inlays, his thoughts that eve on the morrow's joy the household gathered in the courtyard lamps, casting golden pools, the air scented with myrtle and rosewater from Rivka's bath. The knock came at midnight, wood splintering under booted fists, the lamps snuffed in panic. Gorgias entered, torch held high shadows dancing like demons on walls, his men fanning out with drawn short swords. "The king's right," he growled, voice gravel over steel. "No bride enters the canopy without the hagmon's grace." Rivka's father protested, voice cracking, but a guard silenced him with a cuff. Tension coiled like a bowstring. Amos stepped between chest heaving the room's air, thick with fierce wet stomachs, knotted throats dry as kiln ash. Rivka met Gorgias's eyes, her veil slipping hard a caged bird. He led her away to the castra tent, the door flap closing with finality, the room falling to stunned silence broken only by her mother's keening. The act itself skipped as Midrashim imply in their veils of outrage, the Shiltot describing such nights as defilement before the scroll, no detail but the horror's echo. Hours later they brought her back, steps faltering gaze, vacant as a well gone dry, but her lips moved in silent tefillah, unbroken. Amos rushed to her, wrapping her in his cloak, the family huddling, vowing vengeance in whispers. This was the system at its intimate zenith: fidelity, weaponized to breed despair, revealing power's gender calculus women as battlegrounds, as in Judith's Tale or the Sabine myths. Tessa Rajak in The Jewish Dialogue with Greece and Rome notes the trope's biblical roots, Dinah Tamar, but here its policy corroborated by Babylonian tablets of similar bed taxes. Debates persist. Was it literal or symbolic of cultural rape? Impacts marriages, halted thousands. Midrash counts 7,000 over the period. Virgins left grieving society contracting like a wound. They wanted no faithful unions, only fractured lineages, ghosts without heirs. Like forced sterilizations in Peru's 1990s or wartime comfort stations, it's erasure through the body, leaving survivors to rebuild from shards. The fifth act, crested with the spark that ignited all Chanukah's stand in the summer heat of 167 BC, when figs burst sweet on branches and the air shimmered over Modiin's dusty paths. If you're still here, it's because you sense the weight of remembrance, how these layers build not to numb, but to awaken. What comes next is the pivot, the fury that felled the machine. You can pause, the heart can only carry so much, but for those pressing on, let's witness the turn together. While Antiochus's machine devoured Sabbaths and scrolls, brides and blood, it made one fatal miscalculation. It roused the wrong family, the Hasmoneans of Modiin, whose zeal was a forge hotter than any decree. The conspirators were 5 brothers, Mattathias, the patriarch 60, and weathered as desert rock, his beard forked like Aaron's eyes burning with priestly fire. His sons, Yohanan the eldest, a strategist with a scholar's brow, Simon the diplomat, silver-tongued and steady, Yehuda, the hammer lithe and fierce, named Maccabee for his cudgel, and Eleazar, the youngest, bold to recklessness. Their motivations ran deep, not abstract piety, but visceral protection. Their sister Chanukah 20, and radiant her wedding, the line in the sand. Midrash Maaseh Chanukah paints them as guardians of covenant, but Berhurn. Maccabees 2 reveals the personal stake, the father's roar against an altar in their village square. The plot unfolded in whispers around the family olive press under stars that wheeled indifferent overhead. Mattathias, invoking Levi's vengeance for Dinah, rallied them. If we submit, who will stand? They planned no grand coup, but a spark, kill the enforcer at the altar, flee to the hills, call the faithful. 3 years of secret marriages had built the network: couriers in donkey caravans, signals in smoke from hilltops, arms cached in caves from David's day. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong sister Chanukah. Present tense grips the moment the wedding dawns. June 167th, BC. Modiin ablaze with joy, defying terror, guests in festal robes, tables groaning under dates and lamb, the chuppah woven of vines heavy with grapes. Chanukah veiled in white linen stands, radiant beside Eleazar, her betrothed, the air sweet with jasmine laughter, bubbling despite the shadow. The Hagmon arrives, armored and arrogant, seizing her arm, the crowd gasping as he drags her toward his tent. But Chanukah tears her veil, exposes her defiance, crying, "Better death than defilement." Her brothers surge, Mattathias striking first. The blade enters the officer's throat, blood arcing hot and brief, his fall a thud that shakes the earth. The aftermath erupted. Villagers rose, slaughtering the patrol in a frenzy of righteous fury. The altar smashed, flames leaping skyward. Mattathias fled to the Judean wilderness with 800 followers, the brothers scattering edicts of revolt. Power transferred chaotically, Menelaus fled to the Acra, Lysimachus to Antioch. But the chaos devoured hundreds of Hellenizers, lynched in streets, garrisons burning the empire's machine, sputtering as guerrilla bands harried supply lines. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours indiscriminately, spewing shards that cut both ways. Yet the system survived, Antiochus dispatching Bacchides with 20,000 to crush the brigands. But the spark had lit the tinder. Judas Maccabeus would rededicate the temple in 164 BC, the light enduring. It's not about the blade's arc or the tent's flap. It's about what power does when it tries to erase, and what happens when the erased refuse to fade. In 1896, in the dusty attic of the Cairo Genizah, a scholar named Solomon Schechter, rummaging through 300,000 fragments salvaged from Fustat's synagogue, lifted a brittle leaf of vellum, its script faded but defiant. The air in that chamber was thick with the musk of antiquity, camel dung from the streets below, mingling with the dry rod of parchment, his fingers trembling as he unrolled the Scholion to Megillat Taanit. What he held was no ordinary scrap. The Hybrid Scholion, dated paleographically to the 9th century CE, its ink carbon dated in 2005 labs to confirm medieval origins, but quoting traditions from the 2nd century BCE, voices preserved through Byzantine fires and Fatimid floods. The text spilled forth Chanukah's cry, the brothers' charge, the decree's duration 3 years, 8 months, thousands of brides shadowed by the Hagmon's claim, 7,000 in Agadic hyperbole to tally the tears. Schechter felt it then, the chill of connection, as if the Genizah's guardians, rabbis who deemed nothing too trivial to save, whispered across millennia. Scientific methods validated multispectral imaging in 2012 at UCLA revealed erased undertexts, layers of Midrash overwriting business ledgers, proving deliberate preservation. It confirmed the unverifiable, made tangible, the ius primae noctis, not in Maccabees' terse history, but in these glosses bridging the revolt's trigger from altar to bridal bed. Why it matters pierces the veil of time. This teaches that atrocities aren't anomalies but architecture's power's playbook, from Epiphanes to Erdogan, where women's bodies become borders to conquer. Psychologically, it's trauma's echo, Stockholm not in submission, but in Chanukah's exposure, a reclaiming of agency amid violation, as Judith Herman's studies on survivors attest. Parallels scream the Bosnian rape camps of 1992, systematic as Antiochus's Castra or Rohingya villages raised for re-education. Remembering matters because forgetting is the tyrant's ally. As Primo Levi warned, it happened therefore, it can happen again. It's not religion's tale, but humanity's what unchecked empire becomes, and the fingernail faith that outlasts it. The empire crumbled in 63 BC under Pompey, but they couldn't erase 18 women Midrash counts that many defiant brides with veils and verses. Think on that, the blueprint faded, but the resistance's ink endures, redefining victory not in crowns, but in the stories that refuse silence. They didn't see the rededication's flames, but their shadows danced in the light. Chanukah was meant to disappear. That was the plan, the Hagmon's tent, a black hole swallowing joy, the Seleucid scrolls logging her as pacified asset, her name dissolving into the empire's vast ledgers of compliance like so many footnotes in forgotten decrees. The machine whirred on indifferent, its gears greased with the silent screams of 7,000 in the teller's tallies, each a statistic in Antioch's archives, buried under layers of clay tablets and triumph inscriptions. But she didn't vanish. Nor did Rivka with her potter's hands clenched in prayer, nor Miriam whose veil became a banner in hilltop tales, nor the legion of brides whose wedding nights bled into legend, their resistance woven into the warp of Midrash like gold thread in a mourner's tallit. They're still here, in the Genizah's guarded fragments, yellowed and resilient, deciphered by hands steady with purpose. In the ground of Modiin, where archaeologists in 1995 unearthed a first-century mikveh, its steps worn by women purifying before vows unbroken, carbon-dated to echo the era's defiance. In the words of the Shiltot preserved in Babylonian yeshivas against Mongol hordes reciting Lo Timsi, Lo Kala, Shelo Yikachenu Hagamon, you will not find a bride whom the governor does not take. Translation. No union, pure under the yoke, but in refusal, purity reclaimed. You're not just reading, you're a witness. And witnesses are the past's lifeline, the chain that tethers horror to healing, ensuring the machine's blueprints gather dust while the sparks multiply. To witness means holding the weight without buckling, feeling Chanukah's veil tear in your own chest, Rivka's silence roar in your ears, the collective 7,000 rising like a tide against the decree's dam. It connects to today, where the Apamea II unmasks modern hagmons in boardrooms and barracks, where Uyghur camps echo Castra with forced veils of another sort, where every scroll band finds its twin in book pyres, from Fahrenheit 451 to Kabul's libraries aflame. We owe the past vigilance, the audacity to name the systems bureaucratic, patriarchal, imperial that birth such evils, and the poetry to mourn without forgetting. These stories matter because they humanize the statistic, remind us that behind every edict is a face, a hand extended in covenant, a night stolen, but a dawn seized back. In remembering, we build memorials stronger than stone conversations that challenge actions that amend a refusal to let erasure win. If this moved you, if Chanukah's cry or the machine's grind lingers like a half-remembered dream, leave a comment below. What struck deepest, the system's cold precision, the bride's unyielding light? Share your reflections, your questions, the parallels you see in our fractured world. These dialogues born in the comments forge are how we grapple, grow, guard against repetition. Because the conversations turn witnesses into allies, the grappling into guardianship. If you hold that voices like theirs, veiled yet visible, silenced yet singing, deserve the light, subscribe. Not for accolades or algorithms, but for the silences yet to shatter, the stories interred in digital genizahs, the refusals that echo across epochs. Antiochus ruled 4 years in this frenzy, from 167 to 164 BC, erecting a system that schooled every future despot, from Nero's arenas to Stalin's purges, in the art of intimate annihilation, the methodology of breaking not just bones, but bonds, vows, but veins of heritage. And the blueprint never vanished, dusted off in dark councils from caliphates to capitals. But neither did their resistance, the tear of a veil, the strike of a spark, the whisper that became war. Lo yishkach et hanitzshat, they shall not forget the victories. The